I can see that there is some of the leadership is here, some of the teams are here as well. Yeah, I know all the DCCs are traveling, not around. But some academics are here. Steve, Susan, let me welcome all of you, staff, students, colleagues, friends, you're most welcome. And there's also a few people who are out of town. Vele, and Andre. I want to welcome all of you to this section. I know that these lectures come very, very fine-tuned between, except that at the moment we have quite a series because we are taking up. We host them because in the life of the university, they mark a momentous time in the journey of both the university and the lecturer that we are celebrating. Today, this evening, we've got a lecture by Jay Pather, who has now become a full professor, and we will be welcoming him formally to the professoriate and celebrating the journey that Jay has traveled. The journey is long, takes many decades to get to this point. We also hope that it is a good time to take a moment and listen to his journey together with a wider community of friends, family, because the lectures are presented in such a way that a broader audience can understand. That's why I come. You can imagine the variety of disciplines that I have to go through. Sometimes I go to chemistry and other things. If they were presented in technical terms, I would not understand. I hope you will not confuse me. But indeed, we have to take this moment once in a while to celebrate the journey that our professors have traveled. For me, it also gives me insight into the work that our academics or professors are doing at UCT. As a new VC, of course, it will take me a long time to get to learn about what everyone is doing. So it's this moments like this where I actually get to hear what is happening, what professors are doing, because they're also not doing it on their own. They're doing it with collaborators, they're doing it with their students, and so I get to see all of that. But also, I think what's important for me is that I spend most of my day dealing with problems. All the problems that everyone doesn't want to deal with in the university, they escalate them to my office. This is the one moment where I get to relax and enjoy and be intellectually stimulated. So it's also the reason why I like to host them myself as well. And not delegate. Let me also just introduce to you the Latin party that we have. Professor Chose Casey. I know you have no idea who she is, but I will let you know she's the Dean of Humanities faculty, and she will have the honor of formally introducing our lecturer this evening. Let me also introduce Professor Mark Fleischman from the Center for Theatre, Dance and Performance, and he will give the vote of thanks before we begin. So the title for tonight will be Shifting Spaces, Tilting Time, Arts and Arts Education in a Society that Aids for Transformation. I'm sure most of us that will be related to the title of your talk, and more especially the content and the delivery of your talk. More complexities of societal change, the inertia that often accompanies it, and also how art must help us navigate and disrupt colonial legacy in creative spaces. We're very proud of our scholars and the work that they do. We're very proud of the work that you've done, Jay. And you have helped us advance the mission of this university. You help us advance and promote the funding of this university. And we thank you for taking the time this evening to share with us your journey, the piece of yourself, as we all join in celebrating your success. Allow me to invite the Dean to introduce our lecture. Thank you.
This is our collective curtain call with a bow to and for our beloved Professor Jay Pather. We gather here to look back at a career spanning over 40 years on stage and putting productions on stage. As you will appreciate, we cannot possibly have time to cover all the wonderful achievements of Professor Pather in a matter of minutes. So I'm now left with the decision to categorize some of his achievements just to highlight the preciousness of this brilliant scholar and practitioner. A child of the 1960s and youth of the 1970s, Professor Pather lived through the baptism of political fire in South Africa through a period of heightened student activism that caught the attention of the world. As a politicized art student in the late 1970s, this saw Professor Pather utilize his two passions of arts and scholarship to make his contribution to the freedom of this country. This saw him perform in New York City in 1983, some provocative pieces titled Hector Peterson and another called Twice Fallen, Black Women in Apartheid South Africa. In the mid to late 1980s, his engagement with the African continent was evident through cultural productions from Kenya, more specifically from Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and also adaptations of Shakespeare in Africa. His work in the 1990s caught the attention of institutions in Cape Town that officially moved him from Durban to Cape Town, where he began his journey with the University of Cape Town in 1992. Never one to choose or even separate the practical and the theoretical, Professor Pather demonstrated an unusual ability to excel in both simultaneously, a rare and tremendous feat indeed to be celebrated by academics and practitioners alike, and he has enriched both immensely. At UCT, Professor Pather started his career in dance and became quickly recognized for his depth. To date, he has supervised many dozen honors students, over 25 master students and 10 PhDs, an unusual achievement in his field, given that most graduates go on to be performers in the vast industry. Another unusual achievement in this regard is that Professor Pather has personally raised funds for the majority of his postgraduate students, who all testify to his commitment to their excellence, thus making our institution maintain high regard from its alumni. At an institutional level, he has served in many university committees, most notably as the chair of the Works of Arts Committee at the peak of the Rhodes Must Fall student movement, where he worked to transform arts and symbols across the university, including the contentious sculpture of Sarah Baartman, which led to many debates amongst staff and students and relevant stakeholders, ultimately contributing to the process of changing Jemison Hall to Sarah Baartman Hall. Away from the limelight, he also served in the Faculty Promotions and Remuneration Committee, Human Resources Committee, as well as the Advisory Board of the African Gender Institute. Professor Pather is also UCT's go-to contact point for public dialogues and interventions, with notable collaborations with some flagship programs such as Great Texts, Big Questions, where over 150 public lectures have been hosted in the Faculty of Humanities and some with the Faculty of Science. This kind of impact means that Professor Pather has worked diligently over the years to close the gap between the University of Cape Town with its immediate Cape Town environment, a true commitment to social responsibility for us as a public institution. Professor Pather is also a notable institution builder, constantly increasing the profile of our institution, associated with his powerful name everywhere he goes across the world. First, here at home, Professor Jay Pather's name is publicly associated with the mega festival Infecting the City, a flagship annual festival in the city's calendar. Other cities took notice, and Professor Pather remains in demand as director and curator of multimedia performance installations. All in the while, Professor Pather has served the whole of South Africa in his roles in the National Arts Festival as a long-serving member and heading it in the latter part of his service. This is arguably South Africa's premium arts event with international attraction that is difficult to quantify. Professor Pather is the first choice academic for embassies and other international partners that wish to collaborate with the South African art scene, and this has once again increased our global standing in the professional community of artists the world over. When you read that UCT is an African university of great repute with international rankings, just know that Professor Jay Pather's name features in those conversations. As the director of the Institute for Creative Arts, Professor Pather has consistently had highly impactful and timely interdisciplinary interventions that force us to reconsider our work across disciplines. As Dean, I could not be prouder of such a rich platform for our students and staff, and of course the greater community we exist in. Our community has benefited from Professor Pather's fellowship program that has attracted art fellows from Ghana, Nigeria, Zambia, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Cameroon, Senegal, Egypt, India, the United States, the Netherlands, Malawi, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland, satisfying our character as an Afropolitan university. And I'm sure that the list is longer than that. He holds prestigious positions in the Netherlands and Brazil as curator of Afro Vibes and co-curator, respectively, as well as a curatorship at the Smithsonian National Museum for African Art in Washington, D.C. Back in South Africa, but beyond UCT, Professor Pather served as the chair of the review board at the University of Pretoria and Creative Projects Assessment for Promotions at the University of Witwatersrand, demonstrating the respect he commands throughout the country. He also served as a judge in the acclaimed Business Arts South Africa Awards. He served as chair of the Performing Arts Network of South Africa, chair of the jury of the International Award for Public Art, member of the State Theatre Board in Pretoria, and an executive member of the National Advisory Board on Performing Arts, appointed by the Minister of Arts and Culture. I'm catching my breath, and I promise you, this is just to mention a few. His achievements are astounding, and as something of a point of culmination, Professor Pather will be releasing a book soon to add to his illustrious publications. At this stage of his career, Professor Pather is quite simply one of the brand ambassadors for the University of Cape Town and South Africa, consistently putting us on stage in literally every continent in the world. I admitted at the beginning that it is not possible to summarize in a short introduction a career of 40 years. We are deeply indebted to Professor Pather as an activist and as a scholar who has seen this country through some of its darkest chapters and still no less committed to its transformation today, as evidenced by the title of his inaugural lecture. So, as I'm about to take a seat and bring Professor Jay Pather on stage, I think it would be fitting that we stand for this curtain call for our beloved professor who has consistently put us on stage.
Thank you. That was incredibly generous. And I am very choked up. So, thank you. Vice Chancellor, the Dean of Humanities, colleagues and friends, I'm going to just bring this up and hope everything works. Okay, great. Thank you. Vice Chancellor again, Dean of Humanities, Professor Mark Fleischman, colleagues, friends. Thank you so much for being here. I really, truly appreciate that you've all made this effort and on this hot evening. I hope I can do justice to everything. I really want to start by paying homage to a few people, my family and parents, an extraordinary dad, an activist who masterminded the sports boycott in 1972 during apartheid, easily one of the most hated people at the time. My legend of a mother to whom I've dedicated most of my work, to an institution by the name of the University of Durban Westville, all my teachers, Devi Bhagwan, Roy Jithu, Gauri Naidu, Betty Govenden, Robin Singh, Surya Govender, Zoe Malva, Isabel Hofmeyer, my late friends, Junaid Ahmed, Ashley Ward, and Kribin Pillay, who all in their own way taught me to be inventive, intellectually disciplined, but artistically uncompromising and fierce. And from the age of 18, to be wild and courageous. And my partner, Dr. Andre Links, who didn't teach me to be wild. The inaugural address, this one, due to delays brought on by COVID, is being delivered in the year of that I retire. So I'm going to take some creative license with the topic, and it's only part professing in the way it's meant to be, and part nostalgia. Forgive me. On reflection, I realized I had some thorough early lessons in appreciating what is at the core of my work, the simple matter of context in transformation. In 1984, I returned to South Africa after writing at the Fulbright Scholar at New York University a manifesto in the form of a thesis titled Multimedia Performance Art Forms for Social Change and Political Struggle, which in its own lofty way critiqued colonial art forms and provided scholarly grounds to create a disruptive performance tradition in apartheid South Africa. Now, soon after my return, I attended the funeral of an aunt that had passed on. I must have cut a strange figure, a Durban boy freshly arrived from New York City, because at the graveside, no less, soon after my aunt's body was lowered to the ground, two of my uncles standing behind me began to talk about me. And the conversation went like this. I use the accent not for comic purposes, but for context. And the one goes, "Hey, who's that one?" "Oh, Jayan." "Who?" "Emin Sunman." Emin Pather is my father. "Oh, that one standing there like one big shot. What's he doing now?" "I don't know," the other one says, "dancing or something." The other one goes, "What kind dance? What kind of dance?" And without missing a beat, my all-knowing other uncle says, "Disco dance." So no matter my lofty aspirations to change society, nay, the world through my art, I found out very early in my life that my closest and dearest will always see me as a disco dancer. Context, when it pulls you down to size, in the midst of a graveyard may not be everything, but it is certainly humbling. So my topic, shifting spaces, tilting time, art and art education in a society that aches for transformation. And just to run by, I'm going to talk about art as demystification. Sounds like a big word, but I'll try to break it down through some personal choreography. And then the curation of a transforming city, Infecting the City Festival, and the curation of a disruptive embodiment in the ICA Live Art Festival, and then curating crisis and the development of new grammar to curate crisis, and the curating of a performance archive. Relativity, relationality, and context in art education was everything to me. From an early age, I recognized that shape-shifting and tilting is what one really needed to do to get used to in order to survive in response to being caught within taut, claustrophobic structures of race, class, and gender in the 60s and 70s. The Group Areas Act, the Morality Act, the Internal Security Act, wriggling out of confinement, adjusting and shifting became a kind of new stable, what I think the Martinique philosopher Edouard Glissant calls tremblement or trembling. Tremblement, he writes, is neither incertitude nor fear. It is not what paralyzes us. Trembling thinking is that instinctual feeling that we must refuse all categories of fixed and imperial thought. Tremblement is thinking in which we can lose time searching, in which we can wander, and in which we can counter all systems of terror, domination, and imperialism with the poetics of trembling. It allows us to be in real contact with the world and with the peoples of the world. So demystifying became paramount, and what I reference in Shifting Spaces, Tilting Time. I quickly found, though, that political brutality is blinding in its force. Its sheer unexpectedness is not barbaric and rough, but sophisticated, smooth in its formulation. And besides its unrelenting, unprecedented force in the many moments leading up to it, there is also such suave nuance in brutality and subtlety and mystery, deftly obfuscating the source of that brutality. It is distance that makes us seize the horrific materiality of the machinations behind brutality, increasingly, and of course on another level completely. Despite several warnings of such over decades, we can see this playing out so clearly in Gaza right now, how grim and smooth and acceptable the language of genocide can be. On entering the academy, I had an unprecedented desire to live, a kind of life force against all that was thrown at us around race, class, and in my case, my queer body. How to create distance and not get sucked up in the pain, right, of my dad's absences, his continual banning, our house shot at by unnamed forces and the like, of being the moffy in the class. How to escape that terror and create distance and space just to think. Despite what one might think of those bush colleges, Durban Westfall boasted a nourishing underground revolutionary movement. And at the age of 20, I was studying Marxism and literary criticism, which imprinted the word demystify, which in my received art education was about understanding how the beautiful Shakespeare prose and the sublime classical ballet that comprised compulsory pedagogy was also by way of obfuscating and serving a brutal ideology. In my thesis, which I subsequently wrote in my honors year, I argued for alternate theatre models that did not perpetuate getting lost in the romance of the well-made play about revolution or the seduction of representing pain, but how to make performance that created conditions for feeling and thought, to agitate and organize, This led me to work with transgressive mixed media as my grist, and for my graduating production at New York University about Black women as the center of oppression in South Africa, and this was in 1983, I created a mixed media non-narrative work, a collaboration using text by the late Zinzi Mandela, dance, sculpture, slide projections on bodies, and 8mm documentary film. I undid the seating in the theater, and the American audience was separated and had to sit in whites-only chairs and blacks-only benches, to a great deal of consternation. You know how the Americans can get, as if it didn't happen 10 years before. Back in Durban, it was much more difficult amid censorship to be that strident in public performance. So I began to create these abstract dance scenarios without text, but in the background, and as like an ironical screening of apartheid propaganda films, which I got from the information wing of the South African Defence Force, who, when I said I was from the university, were all too willing to let me have their propaganda, not knowing how I was going to use it. Multimedia then was not just a trend, but a means to place an act of violence under forensic scrutiny, combining factual political information with poetic moving bodies. In 1987, while teaching at the University of Zululand, the special branch cottoned onto this and destroyed all my projections for a production called Duel in Black and White. I resorted to deconstructing classical plays such as Shakespeare's The Tempest, in which I reintroduced the character of Sycorax, if you're aware of the play, who in the actual play is confined, rechained to a tree. In my version of the illustrious play, Sycorax leads her sons Caliban and Ariel to stage a revolution, destroying prosperous colonial regime. In 1994, I calmed down just a little bit and found a refreshing relationality and context in architecture and urban city spaces. I have never driven a car, I don't know how to, so I walked a lot. My on-foot journeying was soaked in the busyness of living in a South African city. The organizing choreography and playing a city was intuitive in the manner of Benjamin's flaneur. Constructing the city as a theater, a palimpsest of various texts, but with the complexities of the segregated South African city, negotiating one's way, making deals, to quote urban theorist Abdul Malik Simone, to access intuitive choreography despite ghettoized realities, preventing or restricting one. And some of my work, like Cityscapes, which you see in front of you, emerged. And I worked with a range of different companies. And I was just interested in this particular work. I was just interested in these different cultural formations kind of surrounding what was a singular act, a rural woman and an urban skateboarder exchanged the look which I saw on the beachfront, and I recreated that look with about 25 dancers. And so on and so forth, yeah, and working with a variety of different spaces. I'm going to just show you before an interview with Achille that we do have sound now. He's basically talking about, albeit for me to paraphrase the great Achille Mbembe, he's talking around the urgency to find performance languages that can meet the need for the pressing need to find a common world. And it talks about how impossible it is for us to be without that world. And this was a work called Blind Spot, which I will just talk about in a little bit. And without the music, no music, you're making me sweat. Can you hear the sound? Very faintly. You want to try it on that side? Anyway, I will talk a little bit about this work in a bit, and it is just to get, because earlier on I was talking about how mixed media and helped me to find this relationality that whatever the suffering was that we were talking about existed in relationship to other elements. And I'm going to go on a little bit. This was a work I did, which was a deconstruction of Julius Caesar in the Cape Town City Hall. And each work was, each scene went through different parts of the City Hall rooms, yeah, on the upper floor. And working with these filing cabinets, etc., to tell the story of betrayal and Caesar's final betrayal. And of course, I was referencing at the time, I was making a comment about because I produced, directed this work at the time of the switch from Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma. And during that time, that level of betrayal languaging permeated our discourse, right? And I was just really interested in how much that it swung and taken our attention from what needed to be done at the time. And here you can't hear her, but she's lip syncing to memories. And the work ends with a kind of a rock band outside on the balcony, and where I kind of fantasize about which is not a fantasy anymore, of a Democratic Party victory. And the Afrikaans band was going, ons vir jou Suid-Afrika. It was, yeah. The work also went into more intimate spaces, and I was, again, also trying to take Albie Sachs's notion of stopping to look at the flowers and talk a little bit more deeply into interpersonal desire. And this wasn't so much about a relationship between two people as much as a relationship with themselves. And I staged these performances in a series of hotel rooms throughout South Africa. And it's about two people working through a range of different cultural forms, but seen through it in a very abstract and intimate way. And I was interested in these kinds of spaces that lived on the peripheries of these cities, like in Johannesburg, in Cape Town, as well as in Durban. This one was in Durban. And there just comes a point when the work explodes, and it takes on quite a sinister tone. But there were also, it began to be part of a home series that I was interested in doing about these intimate spaces, and kitchen was one of them. Okay, so I'm gonna lost some time with the sound there, so I'm gonna just keep going. Twists and turns and disobedience also became quite paramount when I was dealing with the city, because, like, I was invited to the Metropolis Biennale in Copenhagen to create a work about Copenhagen, right? And it's a very, very beautiful city, as this image would see. And they took us on a tour. There were about 5 of us that had to go on a tour through Copenhagen to create a work. And I kept seeing this kind of phenomenon of people of color not being inside anywhere near the city. There were many, many people of color, but they weren't apparent. They weren't able to be seen in the city unless they were holding a board or something. And I took photographs of him, and we spoke, and it started a work called Blind Spot, which, of course, an obscuration of the visual field caused by the lack of light detecting photoreceptor cells on the retina. Because there are no cells to detect light, the corresponding part of the field of vision is invisible. I did the work took about 3 years to make, and I did a lot of research around immigrants. And at that time, immigration was beginning to be a thing, and it was very easy for the European governments, like the Danish government at the time, to kind of just say, we need to stop this wave, and they were quite brutal about it. And I did this. I went into Nørrebro, which was where the immigrants lived, and I'm going to just skip Foucault for a second and just go and created these works that took the audience from inside the city, from inside those areas, and brought them. So audiences had to go in to the where the immigrants were, and then had to walk back. And the piece was 3.5 hours. If you think my talk is going to be long, you get the picture. It took about 3.5 hours, and there were 34 performances that I did through the whole space, talking to this notion of the other in a city like Copenhagen. Finally, we went to that area where immigrants weren't allowed, and I did a whole piece with a Danish flag, and and then the important thing here was that because of the nature of the work, the audience were joined by people from the neighborhood, and before long there was, it started off with like about 60, and they literally were about 300 people by the end of the work. And it all started with this one observation. I began to think about the body, and the body as a space as also a piece of architecture. And I really constructed a really beautiful idea of, dancers performing inside the body and inside the shapes of the body as architecture. And when I did the workshops with 9 men and 3 women, from 20 to 70, 71, the work that came out was so painful and not elegant and beautiful at all. And so that started Body of Evidence, and it became a torturous and one of my most difficult works. And beginning to think about architecture and parts of the body as entrapment, but also as the impossibility of coughing some of that held pain. Yeah, it was one of my most difficult. Anyway, moving on, the curation of a transforming city with infecting the city. I want to recall what Abdul Malik Simone again writes in Flickering the Dark. It is the materiality of encounter amongst things, materials and bodies, that exceed the capacity to map, measure, and account for their oscillating relationships. It is a tissue in the sense that it contains this constant push and pull of different practices of connection that compete with and complement each other, not in consensus, but in cross-patterning of stitch and weave, turn-taking and looking out for what Toni Morrison attributes to quilting gatherings of women. I find it's a really beautiful way of talking about intersecting forces in the city, which remain kind of invisible, and how performance could do that. And it's in that realm that Infecting the City, which addresses this kind of cartography, which you all are very familiar with, and what the pink spots and the blue spots mean, and whose land they are. Those it's interesting, the colors. No? Anyway, but this kind of work around land and around spaces is something that I began to be interested in also thinking about and theorizing. And I just want to read a little bit. That South Africa, a country where publicness and public gatherings are central to how we live and have immense historical and political importance, yet it is a country where spaces for most of the population continue to be small, under-resourced, and overcrowded. And I think it's that combination of who we are as a nation and what materially there is that I think is very much a production, besides a bunch of other things, of a kind of a restlessness, concomitant with a desire for both personal intimacy as well as community engagement beyond spatial restriction and lack, characterizes our society. The continued existence of far-flung townships, the historic relocation and destruction of community, the cutting off of rural spaces as a result of poor transportation and basic civic services, and most especially sluggish transformation by an ineffectual government, have all contributed to this restlessness and the desire to maintain self-care and community. The pervasive and urgent need to reanimate the public domain physically lies then at the core of Infecting the City, and we're going to cross our fingers. So, public art, just generally in cities, can be broadly defined as attempts by government to enhance an experience of a city. Sabine Marshall writes that the role of public statuary has been to induce purposeful remembrance in the interest of forging a particular historical consciousness and shaping collective memory upon which group identity can be based. Which all sounds very sublime. South Africa has a limited tradition of contemporary public art. New public art commissions are rare and hesitant. Curiously, there are very few sculptures of someone like Nelson Mandela, which is an obvious choice for a public sculpture, right? This absence and hesitation to develop public art that may embody a sense of zeitgeist may well be the manifestation of a society characterized by indeterminacy, an accurate reflection of the majority of South Africans who live in a constant state of inertia and waiting. What remains of this hesitation and inertia is plain to see, an overwhelming continued presence of sculptures from a colonial and apartheid past. The influential contestations that have arisen around such public statuary, of course, have been well documented both locally as well as globally. But where the interrogations noted revolve around materiality and the anachronism of permanence, in infecting the city is concerned with the restlessness of form, and form that emanates from a restlessness of desire in the context of a persistent, untransformed post-colonial city. In a city that remains doggedly curated according to race and class, temporary public art that shapeshifts and appears with stealth in strategic spaces provides, we hope, some succor. Curation makes room for programming, dramaturgy, and methodologies of care for a range of publics, and its constant shift and flows, and is better suited to adjust and adapt. And just to run through you, Tebogo Munia did an astounding work. He removed or reconstructed shacks in various parts of the city with bullet holes. And the amazing thing about the work was that you couldn't actually see the performances unless you peered in the hole and watch each other looking at the performance. This work, called Umjondolo, relocated red tents in various parts of the city, Mandisindo's sacrifice in the fountains of the city, Atipataruga's work in the Long Street baths, which attracted about 900 people, which was fantastic, and a bunch of skateboarders, which I curated and lost a couple of years of my life. There were literally 1,000 skateboarders that we curated going down Loop Street, right, from the top down to Loop Street. So they went with the traffic. Yeah, and we thought, wouldn't that be so fantastic? Yeah, amazing, like a owning the city on your skateboards. They chose to go down Long Street. And I knew something was going on. And I kind of figured this out, and we, and the project managers and all, we just looked at each other and we were like, there's nothing we can do because they were swarming the wrong place. But it was just incredible. I mean, I really did lose a couple of years. But as we went through, it was really amazing how motorists stopped and cheered and hooted and people in a good way. Yeah, it ended up being not so bad after all. And I realized that, yeah, I was getting a bit too old for all of this. But this sense of taking performance out of the theater and art out of the galleries and catching not just a zeitgeist of exuberance, but also a zeitgeist of mourning when it was appropriate. And so the Marikana incident and the shooting of those miners and Noki's image that kept haunting us throughout the city was just something that that really, in the most amazing ways, and found its way, of course, in infecting the city, in Zogasa's work at the castle, and that level of being able to catch what is happening inside the world in a festival is always very gratifying. And artists then have shown year after year a seemingly dormant city that inspires more than art, that fits in and romances the natural beauty that surrounds its lack. Echoing the words of Filipino Marinetti in the Futurist Manifesto, adopted over a century ago, Mushanja performed the dance of the rubber tree, in which they declared that the climax of the performance killed the curator and burned the museums. A desire to infringe, make a mark, destroy, and regenerate repeats itself in any number of these temporary public works, as in Mushanja's ritual of movement between embodied, spatial, and institutional archives. And, I had a couple of letters and people going, are you saying burn the museums? And of course we're not. Of course it's about them. And Marinetti said it in the Futurist Manifesto 100 years ago. No one's complaining about that. But the idea here of how we're needing to rethink and remake and rather than just adjust and adapt, became quite crucial in a work like this. Appearing in the 2019 ITC, the Abangonkolo a collective that uses site-specific performance as a medium to dig into history, brought a wheelbarrow of Mpepo, disrupting the commercial hub of the city in their work Ngugu ya Mbengu, the cleansing. Director Mandla Mbotwa said, and I just want to quote his words very quickly, by putting these stories in these spaces, we make cracks in the concrete and remind the passers-by that Sininati, we are people, even us. It is to plant seeds of hope in that concrete, to crack what seems to be tombstones and allow love and care to reappear. So when we perform and when we see the bodies performing in these spaces, it is about us pouring water on what have seemed to have appeared. For us to soften them is to give them color, to reclaim our humanity. And for me, that can only happen effectively when it is done with people in public spaces where the art is in full view and proximity to people that need it the most. And various other works like Memory Biwa and Nicole Sarmiento's The Callings, where they collaborated with architects and surveyors who found bones in various parts of the city and created these events throughout the city. And the search for submerged and hidden histories is something that's quite paramount inside of Infect in the City. And I'm going to run through these images. Please forgive me. But just to give you an idea of how vital, how visceral a lot of the work has been. And the notion, the sense of touch and intimacy before and also during COVID, when we did a version called Uninfecting the City, and the need and the desire to find intimacy of all kinds. And this was a great work. Hiddingh Campus hugging sculptures, turning walls into huggers, and turning the world, the spaces into a kind of a sensorium. This was a sound work. This was a smell work. You can't really see anything, but the fountains were by a smell artist, literally a smell artist who got smell from various forests in and around Cape Town and created like the Tokai forest, etc., in the various fountains. And Kate Abani's work, she was interested in these rose petals and creating like a carpet from the Cape Town station out into the city, which, Amy Jeft, I'm sure many of you recognize, did a work that was by an American artist, where she put up all the Facebook friends and she had to announce exactly why each one of them was there, and you could choose whether she deleted the clip there. And if she wasn't clear enough, she had to destroy the friends. Nobody liked her. And the thing about Infecting the City is just these maps that show you how we worked with this ambulatory kind of format. And, and the reason we do that is because, there's only a bunch of people that know about the work and go to the first one. But as my experience in Copenhagen showed, the people begin to gather. And that is the incredible thing, is when people gather and they stay for the work, because they are moving from a work that may be quite popular in the Golden Acre to something a lot more conceptual further down the road. And that kind of energy and is, I think, what Achille talks about again when it comes to scholarship. In Africa, the encounter with what we cannot yet determine because it has not yet become or will never be definite, an encounter with indeterminacy, provisionality, and the contingent assumes the proportions, often epistemological abyss. The range of works, though, imply that even as beginnings or as kernels of ideas may well do in ways that embody social velocity, the emotion of change, of collapse, of rebuilding, animated themes in the remaking of South Africa. One festival closed with a work by the artist and architect Aeneas Wilder called Under Construction, and he constructs this entire work over a long period, and kicked it. And yeah, this was in the District 6 Museum, and it fell to the ground. So Wilder, as do many artists, remind us that in South Africa anyway, the idea of making place with the materiality of something solid, long-standing, properly bolted and firm still eludes, that something in the alchemy at the core of the meeting ground of artists, public and public space is still subject to feverish interrogation and infectious reimaginings. In South Africa, whether what we experience is actual turbulence of a deeply unsettled society, or aftershocks of the catastrophes that have come before, for now these nudges and nods to how a place may be remade seem overwhelmingly temporal. The temporary remaking a place seems to force us to face and feel and think about the pressing need for something more integral to take root in our society, beginning with material transformation that affords all of our citizens the luxury of a ground beneath them that will not again shift, display, and expel. And talking about seepage and an implosion, and what Sarah Nuttall calls in acts of transgression and upsurge, this is what gave rise to the other festival, the ICA Live Art Festival. And in response, the curatorial question for me was, how can we simply support the development of a multiplicity of language, grammars of creation, if these doors were swung wide open, and students, staff, and artists were offered this opportunity. And I'm going to just show you a video. This is a work by Fostal Nicola, and I really love what he says. I have been talking about dance as an attempt to remember my name. The stories I tell are often complicated, hard to pin down. The most I can do is to get as close as possible to the story with everything I have and what I am by throwing my body into it, trying to understand the chaotic space by activating the body. That means that I enter a space where many things are possible, depending on what is needed at that moment. Sometimes it is imperative that I pronounce my name. Sometimes I simply have to dance. And I want to just quickly show you a work by Jalili Atiku, who, since the elections are coming up, I thought it was very... So what Atiku did was to recreate a ritual of worship, a Yoruba ritual of worship, as well as of asking for the person to dispel of its ghosts. I'm not sure you can hear everything, so I'm just going to speak over. And in particular, what he had was a large stack of A4 pages of various monarchies and civilizations throughout the African continent. And the audience took one at a time, and it was a very long work, took one at a time and placed it in front of Donald Trump. And just the idea of the depths and the complexity of the African continent that Trump was attempting to talk about in one word, and yeah, an awful word at that. You know, at the same time, the throwing of feces at the Cecil John Rhodes by Omani Makwela was it was significant that this happened pretty much at the same time as the first festival. And I just want to show you a section of it. So this was one of the first live art festivals held in different rooms at the City Hall and the Hiddingh Campus. So I'm just going to talk over these. So what is live art? It started off as performance art, and we've adopted the nomenclature live art, and it is about taking risks, and it is about breaking certain disciplinary boundaries, but it is also like with Iclea, and you've just listened to Buhlebezwe Suwani, they refused to perform, and so they had a discussion instead. And that freedom of the artist to be able to make those kinds of decisions is something that is very rare in a country that is based on cultural economy and all of that. But it's a very, very precious space and a very important space. This is Gabrielle Golites. This was one of the first renderings of her work Elegy, which has now traveled all over the world. And I think that being able to, or having that little space for that experiment is something that we've held extremely dear, because they look like opaque actions, but they're searching for a language, a vocabulary of seepage and excess that articulates without compromising the distension of the time. And citing the failure of current systems of communication to arrive at the core of transformation and social justice, and a breakdown of language and logic. And in many respects, getting closer to our experience of these moments as dream. Jalili Atiku again did a work about BP oil and Shell oil, sorry, and Lagos, and where he implicated his body himself. And I just want to show you a little bit of Kudus Anikeko, whose work Europa really embodies this idea of the trembling that I spoke about, but also in a way that is, wish you heard the soundtrack, but that works with very abstract and non-narrative forms to arrive at a vulnerability that is that really pays homage to this upwelling of feeling. And the carrying of intergenerational legacy is extremely prevalent, but especially when the artist is going much more deeply than creating a kind of a prince and princess narrative with tutus. So like Nelly Sewer Klaber's reference of human zoos, and I mean, lest we forget, it was 1931 was the last one in Paris, and her work, They Look at Me and What They, and this Here's What They Think, is definitely using hilarity and humor together with this incredible thesis of moving Black bodies. And various artists, Flora Mahuku's use of technology, that also moving out of just the body, but the body in relationship to technology that remains obscure about their own life. And Bernardo Coy Jackson staged incredible work, which, yeah, so the audience had to arrive. This was actually a video of the work in Sweden, but we've done it twice in Cape Town. So they had to fill in these forms in order to get in. But of course, audience members think it's a joke, and so they don't pay much attention to the forms. And yeah, and then it becomes quite hairy. Because we don't want to fill in those forms, or we think what the hell, we paid our ticket price. And it's really difficult for people to get in, really difficult. Very few people, maybe, maybe some of you and myself, but I would get in because I'm too scared of my visa being refused. So, but this idea of, of finally getting to see the body perform was quite ingeniously told, and the story just, it takes a while, but some people get in and they still have to continue to work in order to get what they want. So I just want to show this to you while I finish this idea about curating crisis. This is a work by Gabriel Goliath. The art world has often displayed curious responses to crisis, regarding crisis at once as both an attack on commercial interests and as an attractive selling point. The machinery of galleries and museums proceed then to invite, package, label, and sell it. Artists sometimes find their representations of crisis in large-scale exhibitions that swallow the work that is part of the machinery of acquiring, displaying, and selling what is of the moment. So the calls on the curator to navigate this complex space and take care of the work, its explosive context, and its audiences are challenging, to say the least, and even sometimes unattainable, because the curation of anarchy or crisis is a contradiction in terms, right? Riddled with notions of commodification, appropriation, and gentrification. In global context, such curation flirts with the reenactments of regimens of touring and exhibiting Black bodies derived from a not-so-distant past. Nevertheless, it may be useful as a starting point to then suggest that the more self-conscious a process this curation is, the better. In other words, the revealing or exposing the act of framing. And in my later years, I go back to the process of framing. And very quickly, I think I've got 5 minutes. Do I have 5 minutes? Or am I in my own world here? 5 minutes? Sorry? Okay, 5 minutes, 2 minutes. This is an exhibition of photographs related to the Rhodes Must Fall movement, curated by Wandile Hasebe for the Center for African Studies Gallery. But it was disrupted at its opening by students from the Trans Collective, a group that prioritizes transgender, gender non-conforming, and intersex students at UCT. Protesting against the lack of representation of women and transgender students in the exhibition and in the movement. So the disruption of the exhibition the subject of which was disruption itself, and the emergence of an uncontainable, uncuratable matrix of crisis surfaces as a new point of departure to consider. Disruption emerges then as a particular performative form and increasingly as an extension of the kind of language that is missing from sanctified curatorial spaces. Ignoring this, political proclivities aside, would be futile. In her article, Black Is and Black Ain't, Performative Revisions of Racial Crisis, Nadine Ellers reimagines crisis then as a site of reformation of identity, a positive means to imagine and enact the body. The point of crisis is revisioned as a point of danger that proffers choices and could serve as a turning point. And so I began to, understanding how, in some respects, as a society, we're incredibly generous in terms of being aware of that disruption and having the conditions to do it. I'm curating at the Smithsonian Museum of African Art, and I can promise you, there are light years to go in terms of what we're able to do around race and class and identity and sexuality and what they're able to do. So I began to develop this ideas around a new grammar. It's just a fancy way of saying, how can we look at what we do as curators, and thinking about understanding how curating presence is essentially problematic, and that we cannot borrow from just curating objects, and it requires a new look in. And also around things like terminologies, because we're using live art, but of course the presence of hegemonies coming together, as we can see in this Nazareth Shembe movement in northern KwaZulu-Natal, which comes from the 19th century, where this you doing iskashini with helmets and kilts co-opted this moment of a kind of a meta consciousness for for the colonized peoples of any land happens at the moment of coloniality, right? It's not 20th century. It happens then because that's when double consciousness begins to happen. And out of that, so much wealth of presentations obviously begins to happen to make that, to work with that colonial difference. And so we, as I'm beginning to understand the more I worked internationally as well, that more other terms need to come in. People like Albert Koza, Bukhlebezwe Suwani, Stembile Msane, who are working with what they are also doing around ritual and a whole varieties of inroad into ritual and mixed media and all of that, that of course makes live art look like kindergarten because of its complexities, and also around spatialities. Dean Hutton did a work called Fuck White People, and it was, they got death threats from the Ku Klux Klan and the Cape Party and all sorts of things. So what they did was projected themselves speaking directly to the audience on one of the colonial sculptures, and this for me is a really good example at arriving at opacity, arriving at rhythm through an artist-driven space, in an artist-driven way, in order to find that new knowledge. And I am amazed at how many international researchers write about our work because of the levels of inventiveness, the levels of opacity that still needs to be discovered. In the ICA, very quickly, this combination of talks and performance in land was a really important part of our work, and how to move from discourse into actual performance. This is a work by Kim Gurney, and followed by a walking tour and an installation, followed by a panel discussion. So this kind of moving in and out of work is something of performance and discourse has become the hallmark of our work. And I want to end, if life wills it to happen. Let me just see. Sorry. There's no sound in this one, so it's okay. But I do want to show you. It's just a brief look. Yeah, hold on. Okay, I'll do the rest. Just hold on. I'm stopping it again. How long was it? Yeah. Oh, great. So we are going to be launching this officially, but just to give you a sense of what I dreamt as a means to demystify and work. This is the archive of the ICA has been quite incredible, and so I found a way to take all these projects, the interdisciplinary, the publications, the concerts, and the podcast series, etc., and we've created this developing like themes. This one, love is ethic, love is action, and going through it, one can move across a kind of a curated sense of the work. This is Ati Pataruga's work, and you could see their work as video or with good Wi-Fi. and listen to a podcast, and then move on to a great text, a series of great texts called Things Unfinished, which also all of them dealing with this notion of love as ethic and love as action, and so on and so forth. The various themes, and I think that the idea here is to implore us to understand this kind of multimodal, even though we are on a screen, this multimodal way of understanding, say, the nation state, which takes us in the first instance to someone like Gayatri Spivak speaking one of the events that we hosted with a few years ago, Still Waiting for the Revolution, that moves into a performance, that moves into an article by Namusa Makubu, that moves into a performance and then a full-on symposium, and you can go in and find all of that out. And that feels like a good way to come full circle, and to end by saying, in art making, approaching transformation while attempting to demystify sophisticated settler coloniality is always daunting. Despite our quest for certainties, curatorial order, and the meeting of audience expectations, neat solutions and tied-up endings prove vacuous. When such polarities as the need for visibility amongst disenfranchised people and the ache to be invisible and slip into the seductive arms of a universal post-racial humanity surface, when present and past connect collapsing time for the artist, it seems appropriate to be irresolute and suspended, to hold as an image strong and uncompromising the idea that this non sequitur, this lack of cohesion is what we have, is all we have. This distension expressed in the works I've shown ultimately is their enduring, if painful, life force and energy field. In this stuttering evocation, there is none of the body's release promised by democracy. There is merely affirmation of a shifting present, bouts of inertia and movement, but invariably a future that continues to elude because apartheid, modernity, and colonialism resurge not as obsessions with the past, but as persistence of vulnerability. For the performing, non-representational body incapable of lying or wearing a mask, optimism may well only lie in the simple ritual of witnessing and acknowledgement. And so I ask, what are the mechanisms inherent in curation that could possibly render these contestations, this lagging transformation, these spaces and silence discursive and enabling? How do we narrow these gaps present not just in land, home, place, but inscribed on skin, in bone, in organs and human tissue, and resonate time and time and again in interrupted, incomplete, intractable memory? For the artist whose modality is the body which cannot lie, coupled with persistent economic deprivation and shifting ground, these inscriptions are never dormant or buried as the traditional museum, the classical performance, or Western modernity will have us believe. They live very close to the surface of all our skins. And for us as artists and curators, they demand forensic and unwavering attention. The persistence of titles of my works, such as The Beautiful Ones Must Be Born, The Earth Still Shakes, Restless Infections, and Acts of Transgression, is not accidental. And such continually shifting and tilting scenarios, rest, at least to this disco dancer, is elusive and sporadic. And as my millennial students and Edouard Glissant inform me, that trembling is just okay. Thank you very much.
Hello, is this working? Good. Vice Chancellor, Dean, Jay, Andre, colleagues, friends, students. When Jay asked me if I would give the vote of thanks at his inaugural lecture, I told him that I would be honored to, but I asked him what giving the vote of thanks entailed. Like all good university lecturers, he answered by sending me away to do research. This I duly did, referring to various recorded inaugural lectures on the UCT website. I discovered that in many of these lectures, the person delivering the vote of thanks seemed to be struggling with the same question. What is supposed to be done when giving the vote of thanks? So it seems to me that the task is something that speakers themselves make up. And in my case, I will begin by thanking Jay wholeheartedly for the wonderful presentation. This seems at least to be the simplest interpretation of the role of the vote of thanks or the deliverer thereof. But clearly this does not seem to be enough on an occasion like this, and in response to the quality of the presentation, the work, and of the speaker we have come to celebrate here this evening. It has been said that in the 20th century, the crisis of the visual arts was time, and the crisis of theater was space. In other words, in the visual arts, a conventionally spatial practice, artists were driven to engage in their works with the liveness of human experience unfolding over time, while in the theater, a conventionally temporal practice, artists were forced to engage with spatial configurations that exceeded the bounds of buildings known as theaters on the one hand, and conceptions of time that had been transformed into patterns in or of space on the other hand. Now, here on Hiddingh Campus, a space in which I personally have studied or worked for more than 40 years, the distinction between space and time, or in fact, the in-betweenness of space and time, is reflected in the coexistence of these two art forms. Anyone who has spent any time here will know that for a significant period now, we have had two departments on this campus, fine art and drama, the latter more recently named the Center for Theatre, Dance and Performance Studies. And I've always described this campus as a house in which two families live as if they are the only family that occupies the space. In other words, both go about their business without paying attention to or showing much interest in the other, and each group of students becomes highly irritated when they inadvertently bump into the other group in the course of their work. The ongoing evolution of the two art forms in relation to time and space has forced that inadvertent bumping into each other to an extreme. As drama students evolved out of their theaters and into numerous spaces around the campus, bringing their loud voices, their music, and extroverted physicalities and scenographies with them, and the fine artists decided to insert their bodies into their artworks in ways that challenged the very notion of what performance is. I raise this here because it is precisely into this messy space, in between the visual arts and theatrical performance, and in a series of Hiddingh Campus spaces and times, that Jay Pather has inserted himself and has occupied a significant place over the last 20 years or so. Jay has never been comfortable sitting in one or the other space, so he chose to exist in neither. And although he holds a professorship notionally in the CTDPS, he is in fact far too free-spirited and convention challenging to be confined to any one container. This is, of course, a challenge at UCT, which has, in the many years of my experience in the institution, resisted substantive interdisciplinarity at a structural and administrative level to an inordinate degree. I first met Jay some 40 years ago when I was a student studying here on Hiddingh Campus. In those days, many of us drama students fancied ourselves, believe it now or not, to be dancers, insisting that dance needed to break down its obsession with form, line, flow, flexible bodies, etc., in favor of a kind of brutalist aesthetics of everyday movement, with the emphasis on brutal. So in this regard, we all attended a summer school for dancers at the Jazz Art Studios around the corner from here. There was a teacher coming to the summer school from Durban to teach disco dancing, I think. who had recently returned from New York. He had done an MFA in performance studies with Richard Schechner, and he had been invited by Jazz Art Artistic Director Alfred Hinkle to present some workshops, really, I think, on ritual. And that was the beginning of a relationship which has now persevered in various forms and contexts over the long duration of time that begins there 40 years ago and eventually arrives at this point here today at UCT. As Jay pointedly commented to me when asking me to offer the vote of thanks this evening, his presence at UCT is, and I quote, all your fault. Me being the HOD who argued for his employment at UCT. I'm not sure that he has always been comfortable here, but I do know that for all his discomfort, his awkward maneuverings in the spaces between and around and beneath our daily activities, he has brought a challenging and transgressive and confrontational perspective to our conventional practices and engagements. The enormous body of work that is the ICA, lifted out of the chaos of its initial foundings to find its form and monumental presence in the life of the campus and the university and community beyond, is testament to the contribution that Jay has made to the artistic life of Cape Town and testament to the intellectual endeavors that can emerge from art making when it is pursued in a particularly rigorous and, dare I say, transformative manner. Jay has always had an uneasy relationship with Cape Town, despite it being his home for so long now. In an interview, he once suggested that Durban has always been his true milieu. I quote, "The spirit of eThekwini is very strong, intoxicating, intense. You grow up with it and it never leaves you, ever. It pervades my work wherever I go. My signature is unmistakably crafted in Durban. Cultural life in Durban is on the street, in the arcades, all around one. This is less true in a place like Cape Town, which in many respects is an ideal apartheid city, in that the different communities are so far away from each other," end quote. I think one can truly say that the work that Jay has done has been transformative to our ways of thinking the arts into the landscape of Cape Town. In his work, he has brought the broader continent, and dare I say it, the entire global South, into contact with a small colonial-style campus at the very tip of the African continent. He has occupied the streets of Cape Town, as we saw, and other public spaces to present artworks, sometimes almost invisibly melting into their environments, sometimes over the top and extreme, clashing with the environment and the daily traffic of commuters and workers, but always challenging aesthetically and intellectually. In an article we co-authored in 2014, Performing Cape Town, an epidemiological study in 3 acts, we argued that performances, mostly part of the Infecting the City festival Jay has curated in various iterations since 2008, are like pathogenic microorganisms emanating from outside the body of the city with the capacity to worry, disturb, render uneasy the performance of Cape Town and its natural beauty. To talk of infecting Cape Town under such circumstances of natural beauty when infection is associated with disease and contamination may be perverse. Our argument, however, was with the dominant pervasive notions of beauty and art and culture generally, and the city's built environment specifically. The performance works Jay has inserted into Cape Town reflect a more radical conception of beauty, one less concerned with form, proportion, harmony, and boundedness than with the limits of form, with disproportion, disharmony, and boundlessness, intending to produce a response that is altogether agitational, exciting, and disruptive, and from which any pleasure that is derived is, as Slavoj Žižek says, procured by displeasure itself. Such a conception of beauty is arguably radical because it operates as a foreign body, an alien insertion, producing a kind of Brechtian interruption that breaks through the illusion of naturalized beauty, forcing us to look again with a different and more discriminating consciousness. As such, it is potentially transformative, offering alternative perspectives and possibilities for the majority of the city's inhabitants, who are often excluded from both art and the city. Unless, of course, the city's well-developed immune system kicks in to resist at all costs such temporary infections. To inaugurate suggests something that comes at the beginning, the point at which the curtain opens or lifts, or the lights come up from the darkness. But here we are celebrating an inaugural lecture mere months away from the point of Jay's retirement. This fact, given that the theme of the lecture has focused on time, points to the complexity of the subject and the impossibility of pinning it down to one idea, one understanding, one academic disciplinary perspective. As the famous debate in the early 20th century between Albert Einstein, the physicist, and Henri Bergson, the philosopher, showed, there is a vast difference between the mathematical explanation of the relationship of time and space, the time of the universe, and philosophical understandings of time that engage with the duration of subjective experience, the time of our lives. Only a few weeks ago, in this very room, Andrei Lepecki, professor of performance studies at New York University, argued that time, in its Newtonian sense, does not exist. Ironically, the very brief argument put forward by Einstein in his debate with Bergson was that the time of the philosopher does not exist. Lepecki, the performance philosopher, offered his claim that time does not exist, particularly under conditions of racialized coloniality, as a challenge to the practice of choreography, the name of which appeared for the first time in print, at least, in a book published in France in 1700 by Raoul Auger Feuilleux, describing a notational system invented by Pierre Beauchamp, Louis XIV's dancing master. This system and the book linked choreography with time transformed into space. The book opens with a diagram of a square, an enclosure machine for the domestication of movement, physicality, and behavior. Given that Jay Pather arrived here through the same discipline of choreography, a writing of or on or with bodies, in a context in which the disciplining of bodies has been so central for so long, politically and pedagogically, makes this extremely apposite. In his choreographic works, he has always sought to be as undisciplined, or perhaps ill-disciplined, as possible. His choreographic work, Body of Evidence, remains one of the most searingly violent experiences I've had the pleasure to sit through. And yet again, with no small amount of irony, Jay responded to Lepecki's claim for the non-existence of time by asking all in attendance to take a disciplined 15-minute break for coffee before the proceedings could continue. To which Lepecki responded that Jay was not talking about time per se, but about a socially contractual agreement to return after 15 clicks or beats of a mechanical or digital device with the name of clock, which probably makes everyone feel like invoking a socially contractual agreement for me to shut up and bring this vote of thanks to a conclusion, which I will do gladly, but not before once again asking you to join me in thanking Professor Jay Pather for his inspiring presentation and for the body of work that he has produced over his time at UCT. Aluta continua, comrade.
It's all about imperfections. But really, imperfections, but it's imperfect. The life's work, mission that we've been, a journey that we've been on for so long that we've managed to capture in such a limited space of time, even though time doesn't exist. We are so grateful. I know that your promotion came a while ago, but I'm so glad that I got to witness it. And at this point, and I don't know, Shuse, why such amazing people are giving their inaugural lectures when they retire. Rather than now. What's happening? We're going to have a conversation. But let me thank you, congratulate you for your promotion, for your professorship, but it just seems so small in the context of everything that you've done. And I hope and trust that everything that you're still going to do. Even as you retire, you will remain UCT. even with the discomforts that the city has and the university has, we have evolved, I know. But even with all the discomforts, I still hope that you can continue to challenge us with the gut-wrenching, disruptive, challenging imaginations and reimaginations that we brought forth through your work. So thank you so much and congratulations once again. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a question.